Iqbal actually, if I were to give you a short answer, that would mean that he wants us to rethink the law of Islam. This is the essence of it. One is Iqbal's message. What does Iqbal think Islam's message is? That he says that the real message of Islam is the establishment of spiritual democracy. We have not been able to define what he means by. He himself doesn't define it. We are also not able to. There are different views as to what Iqbal means by spiritual democracy. But what I think he means by spiritual democracy is to be understood in his definition of Tawheed, because he considers Tawheed in the humanistic sense. Tawheed actually, according to him, stands for human unity, human equality and human freedom. If we keep that in view and then believe that the message of Islam is the Sultaniya-Jamhur, as Iqbal claims, then a democratic Islamic state, whether it is universal or nation state, having the power to make Islamic legislation to reconcile or in accordance with the modern needs and requirements, that is the biggest problem of modern Islam. If they can't achieve it, then we'll remain in the same state as we are. There is no other solution. You see, what we are trying to do is that those laws of Islam on which we could not say that they become obsolete because of the times have changed, when we wouldn't have the courage to say that, since we don't have the courage to say that, we remain quiet about it, although they are obsolete. Well, take for example the very punishment of criminal law of Islam, of cutting the hand of a thief. It is not applicable in any Muslim country except perhaps Saudi Arabia. Now, has there been any ijtihad on why this punishment is not applicable in most of the Muslim countries? No ijtihad. We have just maintained it quietly and we accepted it, the situation as it is. Even though in countries like Pakistan, where legislation is to that effect, but there is not a single example of this punishment being awarded. And the law is there as a tabarruk. Not that it should be observed, but it should be respected. Now, this kind of duplicity, this kind of hypocrisy has to be somehow or the other got rid of. Have the courage to say how we interpret it. If you were to say, well, all right, I'll apply Iqbal, I'll apply Shibli, and I'll say that these punishments may not be strictly enforced on the future generations because the basis of it was Arab custom. And the customary law was even before the advent of Islam. So, why wouldn't we have the courage? If you raise this question, you put it that way, there is a controversy. No, 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 you are wrong. This is a clear law which is laid down in the Quran. There is no possibility of any ijtihad on that basis. And nevertheless, you don't apply it. This is the worst thing which can happen. So, I personally am of the view that the biggest problem of modern Islam is how to get over these difficulties. I would say that secularism is not that difficult to get over than Islamic legislation and modernity. I personally am inclined to think that after Sayyid Jamaluddin Afghani's concept of Muslim unity under a Turkish caliphate, when it became redundant because the Turkish caliphate was dissolved by the Turks themselves, Iqbal comes forward with the viewpoint of the unity of the Muslim world, and he says now it's only possible through economic and military pacts between different Muslim nation states. Now, he says that they should initiate it. They should initiate, and he says that this can only be possible if Muslim nation states, despite the fact that he is against nationalism, he is holding this view that unless and until the Muslim nation states are strong enough on their own feet, that stage cannot come till they can think in terms of unification on the basis of a common spiritual aspiration. Now, first they have to become strong enough on their own feet as nation states. Now, then when they are strong enough, let's take the example of Turkey, Iran, and also Pakistan. What is the next step? He says join in trade pacts, social pacts, and military pacts. Well, you can begin with 2 or 3 Muslim countries, then gradually the others will follow. Then he describes how can the unity fail. The process of unity of the Muslim world will take some time, but Iqbal thinks in terms, he doesn't give preference to have unity on the basis only on spiritual terms. First he says economic and military. He doesn't advance the same idea of unity on the basis of spiritual aspiration as he advanced in the case of Indian Islam, which you see, it is Bangladesh, the establishment of Bangladesh has disproved this thesis. You can't necessarily have a state based on common spiritual aspiration which is non-contiguous geographically. This experiment has also failed when Nasser tried to bring in a marriage of Egypt and Syria on the basis of Islamic socialism. It didn't succeed. State must also be geographically contiguous if you want to make it as a normal state, even if the spirituality is its basis. Now you are having problem also of Balochistan in this country, despite the fact that it's geographically contiguous. There is the example of the Arab states. They are geographically, not only geographically contiguous, they are linguistically or racially also contiguous, and yet they are not one. Same is true for Latin America. So it's not nationalism in the accepted sense of having common language, common territory, etc. is not really true everywhere. It's just its concept which is somehow or the other developed in Western Europe, and gradually it has been introduced into the rest of the world. So far as the Muslim world is concerned, Iqbal's message is you can unify and gradually start unification on the basis of economics, have trade relations and military relations. A stage will come when they will become a family of republics on the basis of a common culture and common spiritual aspiration. That stage is far away. Initially you can begin in this way, and then he goes on describing how can this unity break up, and he gives 2 possibilities. One is when they leave Islam. I don't know whether he is contemplating leaving Islam by having a secular state like Turkey, but Turkey is a secular state but has not left Islam. What does he mean by when a Muslim state renounces Islam? Does he mean becomes secular like Turkey, or does he mean becomes communistic like former Soviet Union? That former Soviet Union has disappeared itself. So there is now no possibility of a Muslim's unity being broken by a state which renounces Islam. So it doesn't mean a secular Muslim state can also remain Muslim, because secularism only means pertaining to the Sharia laws, whether they are applicable or not in the field of muamalat, not in the field of ibadat. So this one possibility of breaking up of Muslim unity according to Iqbal is now existing, no more. That possibility is not there because communism doesn't exist as a reality. The other possibility is when a Muslim state fight against a Muslim state, like Iraq and Iran. That possibility, naturally, if you are thinking in terms of unity, the breaking up would be when a Muslim state is territorially fighting against the other Muslim state, which has been happening in the past. That's why we broke up the unity. That everyone knows. That's not something new which can happen. So the possibility, let's think in positive terms of Islamic unity in gradual terms, gradual stages, by having some kind of pacts which are economic, for the betterment of mutual trade and of military pacts. I would say that it could have been in the same direction, because you see this was again kind of initiated by the West, by the United States. Unless and until there was no support of the US, there could be no unification in this sense, because at that time Iran was under the Shah. Turkey, of course, has throughout been very friendly with the US. So are you, from the very beginning, close to the US or close to the West. Turkey and you have the same position so far as your foreign affairs are concerned, for different reasons. Iran has changed. There's a big change in Iran. So there is a confrontation of Iran with the US, and that is the reason why there is no possibility of at least having some kind of unification, but it still can happen. For example, Iranian making some kind of trade pacts and military pacts with you, and Turkey separately. And in this way, gradually the other Muslim. There is a very interesting comment which I have read of Allama Iqbal somewhere in his writings. I think in a letters perhaps, in which he has stated, if the Arabs get together and they become one, or Arab states somehow the other evolve a principle of unification, then the Ajam would also follow. And that possibility, I think, is a dream of Iqbal. Arab states becoming, but they are just distributed like tribes in the pre-Islamic times, like the Jahiliyyah.
Possibility still remains remote.
Yeah, not of the Arab unity. But I personally think that Iqbal is thinking in terms of Ajam unification. If he can set an example of Iran and Turkey and Pakistan joining together in Afghanistan, including Afghanistan, in these kind of pacts, even with the Western support, because if it goes in our interest, why shouldn't we go in for? I mean, if they are supporting it, we should go ahead with it. And then gradually also making us, there is Bangladesh and Indonesia and Malaysia joining. And if these three to join on the east side, if they three join together as states having common spiritual aspiration, we shouldn't think in terms of this common spiritual aspiration. That's a very confusing term. We should think in terms of equality, in terms of trade and possibly defense. You see, the inclination of the entire humanity is not in the direction of its spirituality and its preservation. It is what you call proceeding in secular terms, and secularism is becoming more popular as considering religion as a private affair, accepting your religion as something which is private to you, as you should accept my religion as private to mine, and aspiring for those realities which are non-spiritual or non-religious in this context. And this is what we call in muamalat. We should try to think in terms of unification, in terms of muamalat. and not lay emphasis on ibadat. That creates a confusion. When we combine the two, we should, I personally am of the view, and this is what I have tried to express, which I think is not really understood, my viewpoint in that context, that secularism is an integral part of Islam. This is my thesis. I try to establish it on the grounds of Iqbal. But apparently I feel that I have not been able to put across this point of view. Probably there is some incapability of my own that I have not been able to describe myself. I have been wrongly considered by many Iqbal experts as a person upholding secularism. I mean, take Wahid Qureshi, he was also of this view. And this lot of Nazariya Pakistan, they all think I am a secular, I believe in secularism. Although, of course, I tried to project Iqbalian viewpoint, that he who also justifies secularism as an integral part of Islam in the sense of claiming that we have the facility of muamalat and ibadat, the two separate bodies. And then he uses the expression that the basis of Islamic religion, Islamic spirituality, is to adhere to two values, what he calls permanence and change. Sabat fit taghayyur. Now, what is sabat fit taghayyur according to Iqbal? And why does he make that a community which follows this spiritual message must settle its communal or its cultural life on the basis of these two terms of permanence and also change? How you combine these two opposites and how Iqbal thinks that this is the essential mode of Islam as a religion, that you as a Muslim have to believe in the concept of permanence in change. How to reconcile these two, even in Iqbalian terms? That is where ijtihad comes in. But ijtihad की दो angles possibly हो सकते हैं, which I would say I also derived from Iqbal. One is the Iqbalian concept of Jadid, which means that you should interpret Qadim in such a way that it should conform to the modern conditions. This may be the Iqbalian way of looking at. What do you mean by, for example, Islamic nationalism? What is religious nationalism? Nationalism is a secular term. It has evolved in the West. It means same language, same race, and same geography. Now, you have Islamized this concept of nationalism by calling it Muslim nationalism. Common spiritual aspiration can also create a nation. And you creating a nation, and the result is secular. You are aspiring to create a nation on the basis of patriotism and geographical nationalism. And you are using the spiritual term. In other words, you are combining something which you have borrowed from the West by Islamizing it, giving an injection of Islam to it. You are confused. Why did Iqbal answer to Shaykhul Islam Hussain Ahmad Madni? Why did he tell him, when Hussain Ahmad Madni says कि हम कौम के तो इंडियंस हैं, हिंदुस्तान के हैं कौमी एतबार से, लेकिन मिल्ली एतबार से मुसलमान हैं, तो इकबाल आंसर्स टू हिम, कौम और मिलत इस्लाम की नुक्ते का में एक ही है. अच्छा, अब कौम और मिलत अगर एक ही हो गई तो इसका मतलब ये है कि यू हैव डिफाइंड कौमियत का कॉन्सेप्ट जो कि वेस्टर्न है और सेकुलर है, उसका मज़हब से ताल्लुक़ नहीं है. आपने उसके ख़तने कर दिए और उसको मुसलमान कर लिया इस कॉन्सेप्ट को, और उसकी बिना पर रिज़ल्ट क्या आपने अचीव किया है? एक नेशन स्टेट. आपका पैट्रियाटिज़म, आपका नेशनलिज्म अब पाकिस्तान नहीं है. ये जो आपकी फ़ौज जो लड़ रही है एक्सट्रीमिज़म के ख़िलाफ़, ये किस किस्म की कुर्बानी दे रही है, किस बेसिस पर ये कुर्बानी दे रही है? Is it on the basis of a common spiritual aspiration? No, it's on the basis of nationalism, secular nationalism, your patriotism, secular patriotism. मुल्क को बचाने की खातिर, मुल्क का तसव्वुर जो है वो आपने अचीव किया है स्पिरिचुअल डेमोक्रेसी, स्पिरिचुअल नेशनलिज्म से, रिलीजियस नेशनलिज्म. हाउ टू रन ए स्टेट, स्पेशली when you define secularism in positive terms. That means that respect of another's religion, not discrimination.
Him or her on the basis of religion.